Hello, I'm Joanna Catron, and I'm the Assistant Director and Curator at Gari Melchers Home and Studio. Welcome to another Melchers Minute. Our benefactress, Corinne Melchers, painted here by her husband Gari, is something of an enigma today. Did you know she was a painter too? While her letters tell us a great deal about her everyday activities, they fail to answer some of our more penetrating questions. Did she make a conscious decision to give up her career in art when she married Gari Melchers? And if so, how do we explain the sophistication of the few paintings that survive? Corinne Melchers was a student at the Maryland Institute Practical School for Mechanic Arts when she met Gari Melchers on a trip abroad to study in 1902. We own several of her sketchbooks from this period, and you can see early on she demonstrates considerable ability. After her marriage to Gari Melchers later that year, she must have relinquished her dream for a career in art, seemingly without hesitation, for there is no further mention of her returning to her studies, and there's very little evidence that she even made time for leisurely drawing and painting. So much did her life revolve around her new domestic duties, international travel, and simply her support for the career of her international artist husband. In short, there was little time for Mrs. Melchers to pursue her craft. And you know, I think it may have been daunting for her to paint in the shadow of her more famous husband. One has to wonder if whether she relished this change in her plans or resented it to some degree. We may never know. But clearly, Mrs. Melchers didn't sacrifice her talent altogether. Even with the few paintings by Mrs. Melchers that survive at Belmont, we can conclude that while she was a very accomplished painter, she was not particularly an original artist. She adhered to the conservative safety of American realism. And again, because we have so few paintings in our collection, it's a little puzzling. How and when did she evolve from amateur to proficient? And yet we know she was a considerable talent. Oddly, out of the blue, with no other exhibition experience before or to follow after, she was invited to submit paintings to the Corcoran biennials in the 1920s and 30s. I'd say she submitted 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 paintings in that range of years to the biennial exhibition of American oil painting. She was bestowed that honor on account of her and her husband's friendship with the Corcoran's director, C. Powell Minigorode, and Gari and Corinne Melchers were also trustees, so they worked very closely with Minigorode. And I think Minigorode bestowed this invitation to her out of their great friendship and kindness, rather than validating her as an important American oil painter. Still, how did she compare with this group of American painters? It was a very distinguished company she was keeping, and they were all well-known painters with considerable and impressive credentials, but she stood the test pretty well, and it must have been a remarkable experience, first and last, for Corinne Melchers. One of Mrs. Melchers' best examples is the painting entitled The Interior, on loan to us by the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. When pictures travel as loans, they are often installed behind glass, and that is the case with this example, so it might be a little hard to see, and therefore you ought to come to Belmont to see it in person. But until then, let me tell you a little bit about it. The Interior was painted by Mrs. Melchers probably sometime around 1915. shortly before the couple returned to the United States with the outbreak of the First World War. Mrs. Melchers has chosen to paint a well-appointed interior, her drawing room in Weimar, Germany, in fact, the decoration of which she was mightily proud, but the theme of an intimate interiorscape was also the fashion of the day in art. It allowed artists and Mrs. Melchers to show off her ability to render a convincing illusion of space, atmospheric light, and provided her with a variety of shapes, colors, and textures with which to play, often an agreeable challenge for an artist. Sometime before or after the First World War, Mrs. Melchers painted From the Dune Top. She must have sat perched on a dune at Ekmond on Zee, a village on the North Sea looking inward to the picturesque countryside with its ubiquitous Dutch windmill. She's adhered to the classical Dutch painting proportions of 1/3 sky to 2/3 land. So it's old-fashioned in that sense, and yet it's modern. It's a very breezy impressionist view, and I like the effort she took to record the shadow cast by an overhead cloud upon the fields below her. And then there is a favorite of our visitors at Belmont, Mrs. Melchers' painting called The Model. Painted late in life, it is a clever picture within a picture portrait of her husband at work. It's a very good likeness, by the way, and she gives us a glimpse of the model posing for him, a favorite Dutch model named Miep Half, as well as Melchers' canvas, both reflected in the mirror on the back wall. This had to have been a deliberate play on the iconic painting Las Meninas by the 17th century Spanish master Diego Velázquez. To be so proficient at several themes is impressive. Given the skill indicated by these few pictures, Mrs. Melchers must have worked at her craft as her schedule allowed, ultimately saving only the best. What could she have accomplished had she given herself the chance?